Hi everyone and welcome back to One Autistic Person. This is the 33rd video in a 50 video series that I'm doing in relation to the statements of the Autism Quotient. The Autism Quotient is a pre-screening tool that is often used as part of the assessment process for autism, and as I was going through that process myself, I realised that we had to look at these statements as a deficit and as something that's seen as negative, and I wanted to do with these videos to sort of flip the narrative and have a look at things and see whether we can see them as benefits or if there's positives to them, and if there aren't, then what are the mitigations for it. I will warn you that this one definitely doesn't have a benefit or a necessarily positive to it, but I do have some reasons why it may happen, and also sort of mitigations and adjustments that may be put in place. So the statement is, when I talk on the phone, I am not sure when it's my turn to speak. And I say definitely agree with this, but this plays into a bigger problem that I have. So that's one part of phone calls that's a problem for me. And I personally feel like this is kryptonite to my neurodivergent brain. It is my nemesis. It is literally the enemy of my autistic brain. So I really struggle with this personally, and I know a lot of other people do. So I've been thinking about it, and kind of what I have thought about doing with this is, because I've sort of broken it down and realised that different calls mean different things, which means that it's not necessarily all about just being on the phone, but it's more to do with social interaction. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to have a look at different types of phone calls and how they personally affect me, or how I deal with those those calls personally myself, so that we can sort of break it down a little bit more, then look at some potential causes, and then look at what can make it worse, what can make it better, and then some adjustments and mitigations. So First things first, the different types of calls that I sort of have. I'm quite limited in phone calls for obvious reasons, but these are the type of calls that I have and how I feel about them, or how I sort of deal with them. So here we go with different types of calls. So I'm going to start with what are probably my most common phone calls, which are to two people, so to my mum and to my housemate. Now, my housemate's a little bit different because I speak to my housemate all the time anyway, so the phone call is kind of much easier, and often is very function based, so sort of what to pick up from the shop, that kind of thing. But my mum, so most of the time, the phone calls with my mum are very easy. I will actively make that phone call. I will actively answer that phone call and not generally worry about it. That's not always the case. If I'm extremely dysregulated, if I'm going through a bad patch with my sensory differences, or if anxiety is bad at that time, or I'm ruminating a lot, then I can struggle to even communicate with my mum over the phone. And I would probably, I can do it by message, and if she was to turn up, I could probably have that conversation. But having the added issue around a phone, I will actively not answer the phone and not call her, and that kind of happened over the last week or so. I've been speaking to her again, but for a few weeks I didn't really speak to her on the phone. But like I say, there's still communication, but it's written communication rather than it being over the phone, so I divert away from doing it. I can also still lose interest quickly and can get distracted, which I will go into in what I think are the causes of this, or what could be potential causes. So I can get confused on those phone calls. I just don't think it matters as much when it's with my mum, because if I talk over her, or I don't know when I'm supposed to speak, I don't then worry about the fact that that's the case. Then the next one would be a friend. So if it's planned, so I know it's going to happen, so I plan in time with my friend on a generally weekly basis. Sometimes it's a bit longer than that, sometimes it's a few times a week, depending on the situation and what it's about, but they're very much planned. Or the other thing that I have done on a very few occasions in the sort of year and a half that I've been friends with my best friend, I have rang him twice, I believe, and they've both been about something that I've very much been in control over, and um, it's okay when I do this, but I do still struggle a lot with it. Then sort of going into the work side of things. So if it's my line manager, as long as it's planned, so if she just rings me out of the blue, I panic, and I don't answer, and I wait for her to leave a voicemail or to send a message or an email to say what it's about. But if it's planned, I can deal with it. I usually know that there's going to be some sort of context to it. Most of the time I speak to my line manager through Teams, so it's relatively face to face, but it's not necessarily the phone. It's rare that happens, and it tends to be a situation where if I wasn't at home, then it would have been then when I was not working from home as much, when I was out on the field. It could have been that it needed to be something that was talked about during the working day, and I wasn't going to be able to do a video call. But it would tend to be that I'd want to know that it was going to happen, not an unplanned, unless again I was in control of it and I made that phone call because it was something that I pressingly needed to speak to her about. With my team, I need context of what the call is about, or I need to be, again, in control of it. There's a running theme here. So I either need to know the context or be in control. So if somebody wants to speak to me, leave a voicemail, I'll get back to you, send me a message with a summary, that type of thing. And these are some of the things that are in my mitigations and adjustments as well. And again, if it a planned one, but I would be in control of that if it was planned. So it would be like, well, I'll call you at this time on that day. Then I'd know what the context of it was going to be to an extent. So then sort of moving into more general stuff. So services, doctors, mental health services, calls that we are forced to have, I suppose, where it's the things that I have no choice. If I don't do it, then my health is going to be affected, or something really serious is going to happen. And it needs to be the fact that the outcome of the situation is serious for me to even go into that phone call situation. So it again needs to be planned. Lots of planning goes into a call. I can basically spend days planning a call. If I need to speak to my doctor, I will spend from when I realise I need to ring the doctor to actually ringing the doctor, which is usually a few days, obsessing about what that phone call is going to be like, unless it's an emergency situation, and even then it's still probably going to take me a while to get to that point. But again, I like to be the person that's in control of knowing when that's going to happen. Or it's been agreed that there'll be a phone call and it's at a specific time. So there needs to be a lot of planning around it so that I can prep my mind for the fact that I'm going to be on a phone call. And then sort of businesses. So again, on the generalized side of it, businesses. So like my phone company, my utilities, that kind of thing. Anything like that where I don't have to do it, I don't do it. Somebody else will have to do it. It causes me a lot of stress. Even the idea of ringing my phone company to talk to them about something is so stressful for me. I will often get somebody else to do it for me and give them permission to speak on my behalf, because I really just cannot do it. It's only if I have to speak to somebody, and if I don't speak to them, that's going to be a problem. Then I will. Then that's when I'll do it. If I can get away with not having to speak to them, then I will definitely avoid it at all costs. And if it's anyone else outside of that situation, it just isn't going to happen. I wouldn't just randomly speak to somebody on the phone. I've had it where people have said, do you want to speak to this person on the phone? Absolutely not. People who have been in my life, and when people just jump on the phone to talk to an old friend or something, it's just, I just cannot get my head around how that's even possible. It's so intrinsically impossible for me to do that I'm fearful of it. I feel ill. I feel a blockage. I have no plan for what can happen, and my mind goes completely. I just end up going into flight response. There's no fight or flight. There's just flight. I want to go. I go cold and clammy. The thought of phone calls, like I say, they are my nemesis. They are my kryptonite. They make me feel like they are so difficult for me. So what I'm going to do now is sort of look into why I potentially feel that way, and also why hopefully that will give some insight into why other people may be feeling that way. This is a bit where I'd love to hear comments on what people feel that the potential causes for them, also what different types of calls, how they work for you, because I think the interesting thing about the different calls situation is the fact that I can clearly speak on the phone given very restricted circumstances. So I just feel it's more linked to the social aspect of it, and sort of going into these causes, why the social element is even worse than a face-to-face interaction, and face-to-face interactions are really bad for me. Phone calls are 10 times worse than that. And so if we have a look at why the potential causes are, that might give some context to why that might be the case. So this first one for me is kind of the overarching issue with it, and it comes down to social cues. Obviously, I overanalyze social cues. I've talked about this a lot on this channel, but this, with a phone call, there is a distinct lack of physical social cues, as well as other issues with social cues. But there is a complete lack of any physical ability to be able to look at social cues. So the way I think about it is, how can I overanalyze a social situation? How can I overanalyze somebody's body language if I am not able to see their body language? So I clearly overanalyze every social interaction, every little thing that I see. It's not a matter of me completely missing social cues, even though I do that as well. But I am often trying to find out what somebody's thinking, and it's like I'm trying to think that without any visual aid for me to be able to see it whatsoever. And additional to that, because phones are difficult to understand, to hear somebody's tone, and you can't really hear the difference in somebody's voice as much as you can when you're face to face, or even over a video call, that the vocal cues are skewed over the phone and much harder to read. So you can't read when somebody's tone of voice may have slightly changed. That could have been something that then links to something that you do see visually, and you might be able to make those links. And my brain's just working overtime to this social interaction isn't making any sense to me. So yeah, and I'm trying to overanalyze it with no input, and there's no data going into my brain to go, what's happening right now. So the fact that I do overanalyze, it's like I'm not getting the sensory experience that my brain needs to be able to even deal with the social situation. I think that the unknown is a big thing with a phone call, that often you don't know the context, that there's various different things that could go wrong. You don't know where the other person is, you don't know whether you're being overheard, you don't know there's a complete lack of control over the environment that you're in. So there's this lack of control and unknown situation that's going on, and I find that I'm trying to imagine where the person is and what's going on with them and what's happening with them, trying to understand the situation. Especially when it's a phone call that was unannounced, the going into that is just terrible. Phones ringing, the noise of the phone ringing or vibrating, because I don't really have it on ring, but the noise of it vibrating just puts dread into me. If it's more than just if it's the constant that just makes my skin crawl. The idea of it is just horrendous, because I don't know what is going to happen at the end of that phone. I don't know what the other person is doing. I don't know what I'm going into. I don't know how that person's feeling, what they're thinking, what they're doing. There's so many different things that are going on there. There's obviously sensory issues. So sound in itself, sometimes the phone can be loud, sometimes it can be quiet, sometimes there can be other noises and things like that, either around you or on the phone. But also the sensory experiences of what you're having around you while you're on the phone, because of the fact that you've not got that focus of overanalyzing the situation within a social situation. I find I'm overanalyzing everything around me, so my senses become more heightened, and my sensory response can make me quite dysregulated. I'm more easily distracted, so losing where I am in the conversation, as I have other things to take away my attention. I feel that's probably linked quite heavily towards ADHD. or I get easily distracted by something I was doing before the call. So if I was doing something that I was interested in or something I was involved in, that monotropism comes into it again, where if I was hyper focused on something and then that was interrupted, then I feel very dysregulated from it. And I'm not guilted or encouraged to remain in the conversation fully. So I feel guilty that I am drifting off quite often and realise that I've done it, and then feel guilty about it, so we'll continue. Whereas if I've not got those other social cues, as I said before, then I'm not knowing that I'm potentially not in the conversation, and I can completely forget what I've said on the phone due to panic as well, but also the fact that there's other things going on around me. And like I say, if I was doing something before which was important to me, then I will keep thinking about that and wanting to go back to it, and quite often will be doing work while I'm not listening to the person on the phone. I was going to say while I'm listening to the person on the phone, but I'm not really conversing with them. And that can go across all of any phone call that I have. I do it with my mum as well. I'll quite often be doing something while my mum's talking to me. I'm not paying any attention to her because of monotropism, but I'm then completely taken. But whereas if I'm in with that person and I'm there, I can't obviously just start typing on my computer or start researching something or looking something up, because that would be clear that it's rude. So I'm kind of guilted into making sure that I keep my at least a perceived attention on the person, which having a perceived attention means that I will be paying more attention because I haven't got other things to occupy my mind apart from my mind. I just prefer written communication. The time that you have to be able to respond, the ability to read over both the other person's message and consider my response in more detail, and make sure that I'm getting it right, and that I will then obviously look over it again. But it also gives me something to go back to and go, oh, that is what they said, or that's what I said, and sort of be able to refer back to something for context. Because once that phone call's been had, and because I know that they're so messy and chaotic for me, that I won't have picked up on most things. Whereas writing to me is going to mean that I'll get that thing done pretty much really quickly, or I will understand the context of things much more, and it allows me to be able to make sure my response is appropriate. Struggling taking turns when I can see someone. So when I can see someone, I struggle with that in itself. With taking turns, I really struggle being able to stop myself from talking. So just imagine what that's like when there's no possibility of any picking up of social cues apart from somebody verbally tells you, which people, as I've said in other videos, people are really bad at generally saying shut up and I need to say this, or obviously not going to say it like that, but sort of interjecting and saying, you know, you're talking too much or whatever. So imagine what that's like when you don't have any of the social cues that potentially could be picked up on. So the monologue can go on for ages and ages and ages, and especially if I am really going into a monologue, I won't even hear the other person talking. So there's nothing to tell me to just sort of shut up for a minute at all. I struggle with that when it's in person, but on the phone it is much, much worse. I don't know when to end a conversation either. I don't know in person when to end a conversation, which is it's even harder on the phone. It really is, because I can't see if someone is doing something that has become that they've become distracted. Because one of my biggest indicators of when I say that I can't know when somebody's bored, is when somebody's generally there. But if somebody walks away from you, then you know. If somebody goes on to do their work, I'll pick up on it after probably 5 minutes of realising that they're not actually paying any attention to me anymore. So I don't know when to end a call. I very rarely am the person that says, I need to finish this call. The only time I do it is when I have something really more pressing to be able to say, I need to get off the call. And calls can go on for a really long time with not really saying much. And I feel like I go over the same thing again and again and again, or I'll just go down a tangent into something. And I don't know when the other person wants to end. There's nothing there to tell me when the person wants to, unless they tell me specifically. And like I say, that is a problem, because people don't vocalize the fact that they want to do that, and they feel they're being rude if they stop me, whereas I wish they would stop me, because I then go off on a tangent. So it's the complexities of it are extremely difficult, but I also know that's the case, and then I know that I'm probably going on when I shouldn't be, but I can't stop myself from doing it. And I don't know that they I think, well, maybe they do want to listen because they've not said anything. So I go down this rabbit hole of thought process while I'm talking, which makes the monologuing even worse and makes the tangents and the divergence of what I'm saying even worse. So there, I think, are potential causes for it, because I know all of those things are going to happen, and that's why they're so difficult. So yeah, there are huge issues around it, and I think that there are multiple different layers as to why phone calls are a problem and why sort of taking turns is a problem. I think, like I say, I think the main issue is the complete lack of any kind of social cue situation whatsoever, because I struggle already in person, but when you're actually not able to see anything at all, I'm then thinking about what their social cues potentially could be, and you're never going to be able to pick up on them. So what I'm going to do is now have a look at some of the things that make things worse, and then have a look at some things that make things better in relation to phone calls. Some of the things that I feel make phone call situations worse are, one of the biggest things for me is when somebody just says, "Can you ring me?" I will go through every possible scenario of why that person wants me to ring, good and bad, mainly bad. And I'll, in my head, I'll have catastrophized that it's the worst possible thing. Like in a work situation, it's, oh, they're going to quit, or they've had a really bad issue at work that I'm going to need to deal with, and it's going to be traumatic, and it's going to be really difficult. They're going to have a go at me. They're going to tell me that I've done something wrong, that kind of thing. If it's my line manager, I often think I'm going to get sacked. So I definitely go into that catastrophizing situation and people do it all the time. They say, "Can you call me?" and give me no context. Just give me a bit of context. Or if I'm asked to ring somebody, for me to not know what the conversation is. It's always about not knowing what the conversation is going to be about. Or if I've got this really big thing to happen, if there's a possibility of somebody ringing me, I'd rather that. I still don't like it, but I'd rather them ring me at a time that's planned, so that I can, because I'm jolted into I know that's me being jolted into knowing that I've got to answer that phone call. Whereas if I've got to make the phone call, I will ruminate and catastrophize for ages, potentially hours, before I actually make that phone call. So best thing for me is to sort of be, not to be asked to ring, but to plan a time to call and call. Unexpected and unplanned phone calls, that makes it worse. So somebody just ringing me out of the blue, definitely not a good thing. My doctor's done it recently, where they've just randomly rang me after I sent a message to them days before, and then they rang me and then rang me again, and there was no plan of that. If they'd just messaged to say, "I'm going to ring, we'll ring you even on this day," it doesn't need to be a specific time. If they say, "I'll ring you on this day," I'll then answer it. But yeah, I can't physically answer it if I don't know why they're calling, or that there's an expected phone call there. Again, sort of already touched on this, an ambiguous reason for the call. So if I'm not given context, I'm not given an understanding, just a slight summary of the situation, then I will think that it is every possible negative thing that it could possibly be. And then I have to think through scripts in my head of how I'm going to have conversations depending on each one of those things. So you can see how that becomes a really time-consuming thing that can potentially take hours for me to be able to get through. If I'm interrupted or doing something when the person calls, if it's planned, then I'll make sure that I'm free. Usually, like I've said, hours before the phone call. So if it's an important phone call, like when I've had an assessment, or if it's my doctor, then I can go through all of that planning, and I will plan in that time to do the planning. So it's routine based, that I'm having a routine of having that phone call, go through the planning process, through the scripts that I will need. What will I say if they say this? What will I say if they say that? So that I can make it as unambiguous as possible, but also just being taken out of a situation that I'm in and interrupted. As we know, major issue around the monotropic side of things. If I'm focused on something, I can then, somebody rings, I then, even if I don't answer the phone call, I'll continually think, why did they ring? Why did they ring? Why did they ring? I understand the fact of calling them back would alleviate that issue, but that in itself is traumatic. So it's very, very complicated. if I'm on the phone, then it being in a distracting situation, so other people or other things happening around me can be a huge issue because I won't pay as much attention to it and I'll get dysregulated. And also, if I am just generally dysregulated already, so if I'm already either psychologically dysregulated, sensorily dysregulated, if there's something going on with me at the time before the phone call, then the phone call, I'm not going to pay any attention to it because I'll forget everything in that phone call because I'm dysregulated prior to it. So there's some of the things that sort of make it really bad. So for me, there's a few things that make things slightly better when being in a phone call situation. So let's have a look at what can make things better for me. The biggest thing for me to make things better, I think, is just being able to plan. As much as it takes a lot of time out of my day to do it, it still makes the phone call easier. And, you know, regardless of whether it's efficient or not, it's just the way that my brain works, that being able to plan that phone call, understand the phone call is going to happen, and plan through my potential responses will mean that the response will go, the phone call will go much more smoothly, and I'll be able to interact better. I don't like the fact that I have to go through all of that, but my brain just requires that to be able to do it, and it allows the phone call to be less traumatic to me. The actual phone call itself is still always going to be horrible. I'm not going to like it, but it will mean that I am able to give my best in that phone call. And that also allows me to regulate my environment for the call as well. So it'll allow me to be in a place where the lighting might be okay, that there's not distractions, that it's less noisy, that there aren't going to be people interrupting me, that I can say I'm having a phone call to my housemate, can you not come in? Because that's something that's always in my mind. What happens if my housemate walks in and I'm having a private conversation with somebody that I work with, for instance? Being able to return the call after a voicemail or a message with the summary of the reason for the call is always really helpful for me because it allows me to take control of the phone call, so that allows me to have control over it and how it started, when it started. It allowed me to plan time in so that I can be very ready for the call and that I can continue with that environment being correct for me. And also know what the subject matter is to discuss. So like I say, I've planned through my head, I've scripted it, so I know what it is that I'm going to have to do in that call. And for me, trying to sort of clarify what the clear communication of when somebody wants to finish a phone call. So being sort of understanding that people who know me or that I work with, that I can say, if you want the call to end, just tell me because I'm not necessarily going to know. And just having a phone call, knowing that this is the thing we're going to talk about, I can then go into what I have with some of the mitigations and the adjustments that I'm just about to go into in regards to how to end a phone call, because that's the biggest problem not the biggest, is one of the biggest problems for me, is not knowing when to end it. And do I need to do the more chatty side of it, or do I don't know what I'm supposed to do in that situation. So if somebody just wants it, the people at work where they're easier, where it's like, we've done this, okay, bye, and that's that then done. I prefer my favourite members of staff are the ones that communicate with me by messaging me, and what they've all said to me is, you get things done quicker if I message you, you'll get it done quicker, because I'll get the message, I'll act on it, I'll sort the problem out, I'll message and I'll message them to say that it's dealt with. If I feel they need a phone call on the back of it, then I'll phone them, but I'll be phoning them with intent and with a scripted idea of what I'm going to say. So there's some of the things, like I say, that make things better: being able to plan, being able to regulate my environment, having context to what the phone call is going to be about, having some element of a summary of the content of the conversation, allowing me to be in control of the start of the conversation and the greeting and the subject, and to know what the subject matter is, and to make the call as short as possible with clear communication about what the call is about. So I'm now going to have a look at some of the adjustments that can be put in place for calls to be easier, in my opinion, and what I do for myself. With these adjustments, I've kind of already covered a lot of it within the content I've already created for the context, sorry, that I've already created for this situation. But I'm going to just sort of like use this as a summarizing how to do this, or putting it all in one place. So written communication is always best for me personally, because, like I say, I'm able to process that information much quicker. I'm able to understand context much better in writing, which is random, and I can decipher what the person needs very quickly from a written situation, whereas a vocal one is a lot more back and forth and a lot of memory stuff for me to remember in a situation that I find traumatizing already. So, like I say, starting off with a brief summary of the reason for the call. Either somebody leaves a voicemail, or even better, they send you a quick message just to say, "This, I'm going to give you a call. This is what it's about," or "Can you call me?" Even better, "Can you call me with because I need to speak to you about this situation." Let me call you and control the greeting. Now, this is really important for me. So when somebody rings me, I really struggle with the greeting, and I don't know how that greeting's supposed to go, and it allows me to be able to sort of ask the person how they are and start it off from that, and I can then skip past the me bit. Whereas if somebody asks me how I am, I'll go into quite often a long monologue of how things are at the moment. I'm doing this and that and the other, and because I take it literally. Whereas if I have asked them how the person is, it allows me to sort of test the waters of where they want the greeting to be. So if they just go, "I'm okay," and they say, "How are you?" then I'll just say, "I'm okay," so I can repeat what they've said to me. Whereas if they go into more detail, then they may want more detail back from me, and it kind of allows me to know what mood that person's in when the phone call starts. And I thought that was really interesting, because I hadn't really thought about it until I broke it down and analysed it with the research into this video, also the research of my brain within this video, because I've done very little sort of external research to it. This one's where I've sort of looked very inwardly about how it affects me, but I realised that greetings were really important, and that might be why I want to take control of the phone call, both from the fact that I can script it and I can go through the thought process in my head of what I need to do and how I need to deal with the call, but it also allows me to understand where that person is at the beginning of the call as well, so I don't misinterpret it from the beginning. I can regulate regulate your environment. So it allows me to be in a room that's quiet. It allows me to make sure that my sensory experience is catered for, and I'm not shocked into not being able to deal with any sensory situation that happens. So having an idea of what the length of the call is going to be like is helpful, because so if somebody's got a really complex issue that they want to talk through with you, you know that phone call is going to be longer. If it's just that they need a quick bit of advice on something, you can maybe just go, "Oh, I'll message you back with this," and hopefully that will sort out the problem. Or it allows you to make the call as short as possible, which then means the complexity of the call doesn't get too much for me, so I don't end up feeling overwhelmed by trying to work out what the social cues are within the situation. I think wherever possible, I say this a lot in my videos, ask for clear communication with the person. Tell them that you struggle with phone calls, so that if they can tell you when they want the call to end, or they feel like, or they want to give you a summary at the beginning of the call, or just that they're really clear with that communication of the reasoning for the call. That's really, really helpful, and sort of telling them that you'll need to tell me. I won't be able to read anything from your tone of voice. Or what needs to happen here. I need you to give me really clear communication when I'm on the phone. And then ending the call. So if it's something that is planned, so again, if I've got that summary of what the phone call is going to be about, I can then plan to say, is there anything else that the person needs? For example, this indicates. It also indicates the fact that that you are interested in the conversation, but you may think the conversation is over. You're not just trying to end the call. So if you're saying, "Is there anything else? Is there anything else that I can do? Is there anything else that I need to do for you?" It allows us to be able to know whether the call needs to end, at the same time as ensuring the other person doesn't feel like you're just trying to get off the call, because I can get to the point where I kind of end the call really quickly and go, "I've got to go now," or I go on and on and on and on. So it's kind of like really quick ending, which seems rude, or going on and on and on, and they get annoyed. Whereas if you're putting I say this quite often when it comes to social situations, if you struggle with them, sometimes putting the ball in the court of the other person that you're communicating with allows them that sort of breathing space for them to be able to say, actually, no, there isn't anything else that you can help me with. Thank you. I'll speak to you later, whatever. It allows there to be a possible ending to the call, and it allows them to say whether they want the call to continue or not. So, with that in mind, that is the end of this video. I feel like I'm able to end videos better than I'm able to end phone calls. Thank you very much for listening to this. As always, if you can comment on this video, that would be great. Give me how you feel. Tell me how you feel about phone calls, because I know some people don't have as many issues with them. And anything that you put in place to make your life easier, how you what you struggle with, what you don't struggle with. Do you think there's different types of calls for you that make a difference for you, or is it just any phone call that you don't like doing? I love hearing when people agree or disagree with me. That's fine. That's what the whole point of this channel is about. Is if there's a difference, then we look at it, because as my channel name is, I'm one autistic person. Everybody else who has autism is one autistic person, and we experience the world differently. And I love hearing other people's stories. So as I say, comments always the most important part of this channel for me. But if you can subscribe, share, and like, they all help the channel. And obviously I would like people to watch my videos, so getting them out there to other people would be fantastic through those means, because we are beholden to an algorithm at the end of the day. So thank you very much, and I hope to see you on the next video. Thanks. Bye.